Okay, so today on September 19th, a great Italian writer, Italo Calvino, died 36 years ago. And by the way of this, I thought of making a presentation about what I call invisible cities, meaning I played with the title of his famous work, Invisible Cities. I separated the in from the visible, and I will invite you to a journey through visible cities. So we will be in or inside visible cities. And but before we do that, I will show you some illustrations that an architect from Lima, some drawings she made as illustrations to the book by Italo Calvino. That Italo Calvino died on September 19th, 36 years ago. Invisible cities. So this is the subject of my presentation, which was prepared very quickly because only last night I learned that he died on the 19th of September. Usually I make presentations about architects on the day they were born or on the day they died. But in this case, there was no architect or famous architect who was born today or died today. So I thought of paying homage to an important writer who is related to architecture, and his book, Invisible Cities, is very often present on the list with books that must be read or by the students of architecture. So I begin with showing some intricate illustrations of Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities. I took this material from Arch Daily, and I am grateful that you know they created this material as they created other materials that are useful for us architects. So Lima-based architect Karina Puente has created a new series in her personal project to illustrate each and every so-called invisible city from Italo Calvino's 1972 novel. Her collection, which Arch Daily published in 2016 and again in 2017, consists of mixed media collages drawn mainly using ink on paper, brings together a sequence of imagined places, each referencing a city imagined in the book. So now we are going to see these artworks by this architect who obviously loved the book by Italo Calvino and was inspired by it. What do we see in this? We see, I would say, in good measure, very different cities, illustrations of cities than the ones we live in. And my question is, why is so? Well, if you are so kind, please, I hear some noises. Please turn off the microphone, unless you want to say something. Thank you. So, you know, these are graphic works, imaginative works, but they capture something of the spirit of the writing by Italo Calvino. For me, it was important to ask myself this question: why is it that our architecture is significantly different from the suggestions or the descriptions of Italo Calvino, and also from what we see in these illustrations? So I will try to answer this question in the following part of the presentation, when I will show examples of architectures that somehow might be connected with the spirit of Calvino's work, and of course it's a subject in the process of becoming. I am talking about me addressing this subject. Please consider this presentation as a beginning. There are many examples to choose, and I had to act very quickly in less than 24 hours. It's not that I'm trying to excuse myself. I made a serious presentation, but it can be developed. So, you know, the imaginative side of these artworks, just as the imaginative side of Calvino's work, is, in my opinion, very often missing in the actual practice of architecture, both by architects and urbanists. And this lack of imagination, not to say poetry, I think has very serious consequences on not just on architecture itself, but on life itself. And this is very serious, I would say. I mean, these illustrations, just like the descriptions of Italo Calvino, are very imaginative and you know, inspiring and poetical, and this is missing very often in our cities today, and this should be addressed. Yes, in some schools of architecture, this book is read by many students, but the actual effect of this book on their practice later on, or even in school, is less easy to perceive. Anyway, please remember this graphic work, because we are going to see a complex of buildings in Paris that I knew nothing of until today, when I discovered that work, and I will present it in this presentation. Very much related, I think, at least visually, with what you see here. I will comment on it when we arrive there. So, because the spirit of good art, or the spirit of good literature, is universal, is not local. I mean, it could be local, but it is also global. I will show examples from various parts of the world. This is a collage of examples that I thought could be related to Italo Calvino's book. And I wanted to show a variety of things, not just in space, but also in time. I don't have too many examples from the present, meaning modern architecture, but I have a few. I know of others, but I really had no time to incorporate them, although you will see almost 200 pictures in this presentation. So I begin with the citadel, because somehow I have a feeling that the citadel, in its very essence, somehow relates to the imagined cities of Italo Calvino. So I will show citadels, both modern and old, from various parts of the world. I begin with this one from Afghanistan, because we think Afghanistan is just this nonsensical country which needs to be occupied either by the Russians or the Americans, because otherwise they don't know why you know, they shadow the earth, so to speak. Well, it's not true at all. Afghanistan is a very old culture, and I think even the great poet Rumi was born in what now is considered Afghanistan. And you will see they have great not just mosques but also citadels, and this is one of them, which is a part of the, I mean, it received the UNESCO heritage acceptance on their list. So, you know, I wonder if those Russians who invaded Afghanistan, and they are not the only ones, there are other countries, of course, know about you know, the depth of this very old culture. And it's enough to look at the citadel to realize that perhaps Alexander Macedon, you know, the great warrior in a way, and king, you know, he was right when he wrote to his mother that you know, she had just one son who was a hero, but in the area of Afghanistan, any mother, every mother had a son with equal courage. Anyway, this presentation was not meant to be, an exalted, wording about the virtues of Afghanistan. But since I begin with this, with this work, I thought of saying a few things about the country or the land or the culture that generated it. It's a citadel, and it is something about the citadel which I think is very enticing. It is and it's a kind of a paradoxical urbanism, because it is enclosed between, and sometimes, I will show some examples of world cities. This is a world city, WALL. It's a world city. It has walls around it. It has enclosures, but somehow, although it might appear to be oppressive, I think that paradoxically, in fact, just as paradoxically, yogi achieves, enlightenment by immobilizing himself. In the apparent immobility of this kind of enclosed urbanism, surprising results could be arrived at, and we are going to see the richness of this architecture, which is not seduced by the usual myth of eternal, expansion and openness and transparency, but finds value and in both architecture and life through some kind of a submission to an interiority which our open-ended urbanism doesn't really encourage. Anyway, I like this architecture. I like this urbanism. It's old. It doesn't belong to my own culture, but I appreciate it. It was refurbished, of course, with money from UNESCO, but I'm very glad that it stands, considering the ravages of war that Afghanistan was confronted with. So, of course, it is very seducing, the fact that you see no cars, to begin with. That some serious thinkers think and feel that the car destroyed the city. But we cannot imagine living without a car, and even the pandemic didn't make us totally, renounce the car. When the restrictions were lifted, the cars again here in Bucharest began to run wildly. It's like we are running like mad, but for what? Towards what horizons? And then, of course, we start wars like the war in Iraq in order to get oil, because the cars, well, now they are beginning to be a little bit electrical, but still there is an unbelievable thirst for oil and oil and oil in order to run and run and run. And the citadels tell us that there is another way to live on the earth, although unfortunately Afghanistan couldn't avoid the war. But there are many levels of meaning here, because within the walls, of a citadel, you are in a way you have to achieve, to express a normal desire for emancipation and creativity. So thus openness, through being very careful to details, to the small things. And you can see even in the way these bricks are placed one above the other, there is an authenticity and even skill. So, if we have the car waiting at the bottom of our buildings and we know we can run and run and run, maybe we are not enticed to pay a lot of care, a lot of attention to so-called small details. But here we see, although it's an austere architecture, it's like a fortress, it's a citadel, but the level of craftsmanship, architecturally speaking, is high. And is high in a country which is not acknowledged as having know-how and wisdom and culture, which again is not true at all. Anyway, moving forward. Now you'll see in contrast, and in fact, this inspired me before Italo Calvino, or the occasion to talk by the way of Calvino's writing about invisible cities. I discovered this recently built school in Chile, which is like a wall citadel. And it was a pleasant surprise to discover this work. So now I show a contemporary work, a school from Chile by this architect. So here it is. Towards the outside, it's a wall with those round penetrations of orifices, but it's a wall. But inside, there is a complexity, both of spaces and functions, that you wouldn't expect looking from the outside. And I think Italo Calvino was pointing in this direction also, that the complexity, the intricate manifestations of various functions and aspirations, desires, fears, that can manifest themselves within the walls of a world city could generate an almost a dreamlike atmosphere, which again, our so-called rational city, modern democratic city, very rarely has. So this is a work done in a specific climate in Chile. But I think it has some qualities that I'm trying to bring to your attention through this presentation. It's a school, it's not a city, it's a school. But its spirit relates to other examples where I will show more ample urban configurations, kind of in the same spirit. That is to achieve freedom within an enclosure, within the walls of an enclosure. And it's this paradoxical relationship between freedom and necessity, between immobility and freedom. Because when you have less mobility physically, you compensate, I would say, almost by necessity, psychologically or psychically or spiritually even. And I mentioned the yogi. You see here, the wall towards the outside is, very regular and essentially doesn't show too many signs of Hamletian doubts or contortions. But inside the citadel, I could call it a citadel, there are other things happening. So this also makes me think of what Tadao Ando declared at one moment, that he wanted to create an architecture that towards the outside was like Joseph Albers, the Bauhaus painter who painted only, rather in an Apollonic way, color square within other color square in a very peaceful, in a way, serene, and sometimes even placid way. And inside to be like a Piranesian volcano, like Piranesi. And I'm not saying that here is really a Piranesi and outside is Joseph Albers, but somehow I see what here in this work, what I'm trying to convey, that a citadel might look towards the outside, rather in control, so to speak, but inside there are various expressions of freedom. And I like this top view of this school, which illustrates what I'm trying to say, that the labyrinthical aspect of the space within the school is not betrayed by the wall, the enclosing wall. So in a way, this says something about even about the human nature, that sometimes there are people who towards the outside appear to be very calm and in control and even cold, like the Scandinavians. But this doesn't mean that inside they are not, sometimes at least, volcanoes. I'm not saying that here is really a volcano, but you understand what I'm trying to say. And this happens often in the case of citadels. Now we go to famous fortress and citadel, a famous fortress and citadel in Aleppo, Syria. Again, we are dealing with a different kind of architecture and a different kind of urbanism from the ones we are accustomed to. And again, these examples come from areas almost unknown to us, and so, maybe we could reconsider certain cultures and be stirred up to study them, because there are sometimes very valuable suggestions coming from lesser known cultures, and very old, by the way. So in terms of wisdom, in my opinion, most surely we can learn from them, although again, paradoxically, they themselves seem not to be able to learn, because in Syria there was war for years and a lot of destruction. In fact, some of these incredible places had been hit by the calamity of war. Anyway, at least in certain ways we can try to rescue, at least mentally, what is valuable in the culture of the world, both in space and in time. You see here the new city, and you see here the new city. Now, is the new city better than the old city? Now, of course, the new city is for a much larger population. We understand that. But maybe there are suggestions in the citadel that could make us reconsider or envision new ways of doing a different kind of urbanism. And all the picture of the same citadel. So we are in Syria now. Now we are in Romania, a small citadel at Rupea, not far away from Brașov. And I hope Natalia is still here. It's a very
Yes, I am.
It's a very picturesque, citadel. Now, these citadels, of course, they have the fortune, if I can say so, to be built on top of mountains or hills. So they have a privileged, location most of the time. But this was caused, of course, by trying to defend themselves, the builders of these citadels. Anyway, they are romantic places. We cannot build for the whole world in this way. We might not have enough hills and enough mountains. But I think there are suggestions in these citadels, even if they are not very large, suggestions towards more imagination and more expressivity and more even interiority in our proposals for urban interventions. There is something else to notice. Where is the T-square and the rectangle here? I don't see it. Okay, maybe a few buildings were built in this way, but the configuration of the walls and the citadel itself is rather organic, following the suggestions of the plot of land on which it was built. There are other examples in Romania too, of course, from the past. But I really think we could envision a new kind of urbanism inspired by these citadels, where imagination externalizes itself within an enclosure, like in the case of citadels. Now, it's true, in the present, we cannot have entertained the illusion that these worlds could defend us against the monstrous destructive capabilities of the present. Impossible. We have nuclear bombs. So no citadel in the world could handle such a monster. But at least at the mental level, at the psychological level, perhaps suggestions coming from all citadels could have some value. It's a bulwark of resistance. If we cannot resist physically, perhaps we can endure or resist psychologically. Now, Carcassonne in France, a famous citadel itself and quite large. Again, just like in the example and the other examples that we saw already, there is a rather, predictable, if you want, fortress-like, enclosure, the wall, but inside is the labyrinth of narrow streets and houses which are not traced on the paradigm of Cardon de Cumanus, nor on the paradigm of Le Corbusier obsession with man's will to go straight from where he is to the goal, to the desired goal with a straight line, expressing an incredible willfulness. Now, inside here is rather the zigzagging of the donkey that Le Corbusier hated, because the donkey he thought was stupid, because the donkey was avoiding the big stones and was not going straight to where it might have wanted to arrive, as the willful man or architect would do. But strangely and paradoxically enough, again, Le Corbusier in his later years thought of building a monument to the very donkey when he was younger, when he was younger was hating. Anyway, Carcassonne, where Viollet-le-Duc, whom we celebrated a few days ago, had something to do here. He did a lot of work for Carcassonne, saving what was to be saved and bringing in some new interventions. Anyway, the citadel is essentially connected with a medieval spirit. And I think the Middle Ages invite us to explore them more now in the present. They might offer us some suggestions which post-Renaissance architecture might not able to do. It's true, I like Gothic architecture, I like the Middle Ages, I grew up in Sibiu, so it is in my DNA, so to speak, the medieval experience, at least to an extent, because I cannot really say Sibiu is a totally medieval town, but it has some medieval elements. Not as ample as here, not as obvious like in Carcassonne. But again, for those who want to receive a suggestion from me, I would say again that the citadel, small or large, could offer suggestions for a different kind of urbanism and even a different kind of architecture with less glass, with more walls, with smaller windows, and thus, in terms of energy losses, I think a positive step forward. Now in Iran, because Iran also has several very famous citadels. Look at this. The same Iran that President George Bush placed on the axis of evil. Well, the so-called country on the axis of evil, again, a very old culture. And even the philosopher who was adopted by the Nazis as being their philosopher, I'm talking about Friedrich Nietzsche, again, paradoxically, chose as his porte-parole, as the man who most forcefully expressed his deepest thoughts. Zarathustra was inspired exactly by the culture of present-day Iran. Zoroaster, Zarathustra, they came from there. They didn't come from Germany, did they? So isn't it kind of paradoxical? I think it is. Anyway, look at this citadel in Iran. Is it not impressive? I would say it's very impressive. At least for me, it is. Anyway, now I don't know what Italo Calvino might have thought of these fortresses and these citadels, but I like to imagine that he would have liked them. Sorry about this picture with Alami spread all over. This is the obsession with the so-called authorship. These people are unbelievable. They ruin their own pictures in order to claim insistently their authorship. They could have written discreetly in one place, but look. Anyway, Iran, Arke-Bam, glorious citadel. Some parts are ruined because these are very old, and but even as ruins, I think they are very emotional in the sense that they are provoking emotions. They provoke emotions. If you contemplate the destiny, the fate of human life over centuries, if you contemplate the fate of architecture, of building, you cannot remain indifferent to what we see here. But we'll see later on also some more present examples. This is another citadel from India this time, because India also has its own almost miraculous, configurations, architectural configurations. I hesitate to use the word urbanism here, certainly not with an ISM, which inevitably leads to imagine that we are dealing with systems here. It's not a system. But look at the organic quality of this architecture, which accommodates itself in a rather graceful way to the landscape. And this we have to learn again, I would say, and get rid of the stringencies of the T-square and the rectangle, which impose to us now. Of course, we work today with the digital technologies, but I'm talking about the T-square and the rectangle in our minds, that Cartesian spirit, that rationalism, that which after the Enlightenment became in some cases a nightmare. So we are in India now, an old citadel. Yes, it's the work of man, but it's also the work of nature. And they complement each other, I would say, in almost friendly terms. The architecture is impressive. India has, we inspire ourselves from Acropolis, from Athens. And yes, it is important, the Acropolis in Athens. But the Indians, India has n Acropolises, that we don't know of. Incredible temples, incredible citadels, incredible, really, they have a multitude of astonishing buildings. Another one, also from India. And what can I say? This is an architecture that is most of the time not studied at all in the schools of architecture, as if it doesn't exist, as if it is not on this earth. Well, it is on this earth. But we have the curiosity, we have to have the curiosity to discover it. They had great builders. There are these powerful walls, which today, again, would be an illusion to rely on them, that they can defend. Of course, they cannot defend. Our technology is so deadly today that it doesn't matter how thick a wall is, it's irrelevant. Anyway, so India, a citadel, a fortress, and look at this, and it's not just this aspect, but the fact that the man and the gods live together, so to speak. It was this conjunction, this cohabitation between the buildings of the human beings and the buildings destined for the gods, like you see here. And you know, it is as if the fortress, the encircling wall of the citadel was defending with equal affection and parental devotion the man and the gods. And it should be in this way, of course. Anyway, moving forward, that night, the same citadel in India, powerful walls which again could be transformed into dust by the diabolical destructive machineries that the present has at its disposal. Now we arrive at a country which in the mental universe of the Western man almost doesn't exist, unless we think of terrorism. We think that Yemen is just a place which generates terrorism and nothing else. Well, Yemen has incredible cities, most of them built of mud. They even have a Manhattan, a mini Manhattan built of mud, and you are going to see it. And they have several cities which are on UNESCO's list with significant contributions to the world of culture and to the world of architecture. This is a citadel in Radha. I only have a few pictures with this, but still we see here the presence of a genuine, powerful architecture, which, in my opinion, through its virtues, aesthetical and otherwise, crosses the borders of the specific culture in which it was born. Now, Sana'a, the capital of Yemen, which in my opinion is an unbelievable city, speaking in terms of architecture. It's the old city. It is citadel-like. It's larger than what we have seen until now, but there are narrow streets, shadowed buildings. You see very tall buildings. I like this multiplicity in unity, this coming together of many individualities that still can be deciphered, so to speak, in the complex of a collectiveness that doesn't erase actually individualities. Almost each window has a certain particularity. So there is a verity here. I truly think Italo Calvino would have liked Sana'a. And actually, I don't see a lot of difference between the spirit of the graphic works that I showed at the beginning by that architect from Lima and what I see here. But this is built, it's not just drawn. And then look at this. It is fantastic in a way, and it actually expresses, in my opinion, this architecture, a joie de vivre, a joy to live. And yes, it comes from an unexpected place, because we identify Yemen only with the terrorism. But what I see here is something very different. Look at this. It's almost a dreamlike. It's almost like a fairy tale architecture. And it was built and is the capital of Yemen. I cannot ignore what I see. It's a very complex city. It's very rich. Of course, this is the old part of the city, but it's a large part, and it's kept surprisingly well. Now, it's true, you might have to have a romantic spirit, so to speak, a dreamy nature to agree with everything, but I still think it's hard for someone not to have interest, at least, if not affection, towards what we look at here. Even these streets, which are not clean. Yes, hygiene is not the main preoccupation, but there is a richness, the richness of the bazaar, the mystery of these women who are masked before the pandemic. It's kind of strange that somehow the pandemic is making us assume forms of, expressing ourselves physically, not far away from what we see here, except that here they do it because of religious reasons or the customs, the tradition, while we do it in order to protect ourselves from a virus. But anyway, I don't want to enter into this subject because, in my opinion, there are suggestions coming from the said events related to the pandemic that might, and I actually think that between the citadel and COVID, there might be some possible relationship. That COVID is suggesting to us perhaps a different kind of urbanism. Maybe, but I'm not going to elaborate on this, and I'm not prepared to attack this subject. Yet, I admire what I see here in Sana. I see no cars. I see human beings. I see buildings. I see the picturesque aspects of the market. And I think something human. It doesn't matter if, there is a certain level of poverty, but I see a human life which seems to be alive, as it should be. And so are the facades, the elevations of these buildings. They are built by human hands, one brick at a time, one brick above another brick. But just like in the Middle Ages, when they built the cathedrals, let's say the great cathedrals in France, but not only in France, where many people contributed, not just builders, but also, older people, women, children, they all contributed to the erection, to the growth of the cathedral. Here, I'm sure they had professional builders, local professional builders. But you see in the imperfections, the warm imperfections of the details of these walls, like, for example, this ornamental so-called accident here, which is present here, but not below. This was, it's the spontaneous almost intervention that came from getting involved in the act of building without having to ad literam translate into a rigidly conceived and rigidly built building based on so-called working drawings, like the so-called civilized world does. Look at this window here with its oblongs, and look at these windows. And why is it that ornamentation manifests itself in various places, and I would say very gracefully and very poetically? Why didn't they just save some money, so to speak, and build some straight walls, and that's it? No ornamentation. But here we see ornamentation almost everywhere in various ways. And so, in my opinion, we didn't really progress. Yes, we have a high and technology, we have maybe a higher standard of living, but our walls seem to me in general more sterile than these walls. Again, we are dealing with a very poor country, but culturally and even at the urban level and the architectural level, I don't think they are poor at all. I can take pictures of my own city, with blocks of flats, which are much more, sterile and lifeless than what these people built. Even when there is, look, there seems to be a problem with verticality. The walls are a little bit, it's okay. Look at this urban fabric, because that's what it is. It is a weaving. This is a woven architecture. And indeed, here we can talk about, a woven urbanism, or it's a woven urbanism, something we don't actually do in the so-called, civilized and developed world. I admire this city, and I admire the people who build these buildings. They were not trained in, for many years in schools of architecture. They had local craftsmen, essentially. Maybe they didn't even have architects. They just had builders and master builders. But look at what they built. It is obvious to me that these people didn't neglect beauty. They didn't think only in terms of necessity, but they also thought in terms of beauty. And their beauty is also my beauty. There is no frontier between their conception of beauty and mine. I vibrate, I respond to what I see. And what I see is warming my heart. Now the old walled city of Shibam, also in Yemen. Look at this. You know, a modern day. I mean, a mini Manhattan. Yes, built with mud, not with concrete, not with steel. Yes, it doesn't go to the sky like some skyscrapers in the Arab world or China or the United States or wherever. But still, they have very tall buildings, which are indeed sustainable because they are built with mud. And it is amazing what they did. Look at this city. You know, it's both order and disorder. There is a movement here, a freedom of organizing. It's like an organism which pendulates precariously between geometry and freedom. And what makes this architectural and urban organism coagulated, so to speak, is the fact that it is strongly encircled by the periphery, which in some places at least has a wall. I mean, look here, it's a walled city. I'm trying to see why. Yeah, here, there is a wall. And within or beyond this wall, the city grew both organically and yet not in a chaotic way, I would say. It's picturesque, it functions, it is built, as I said, you know, using a word which is fashionable today, sustainably, and I think it's an amazing city. How do you explain it? How did they build these tall buildings with mud? Well, they did. Some of them are indeed mini, if I can call them so, mini skyscrapers. It is a citadel in essence, a walled city of larger dimensions. Look at this, in the desert, or almost a desert. I think it's impressive. It's impressive what a collectivity, a group of people can do if they collaborate. And you know, I understood that in the writing of Italo Calvino, it's mentioned a city that was built in the same way by free people without an emperor, by people who through togetherness, through collaboration, they built together an amazing city. This city is not a literary work, it was built. And yes, human beings can do a lot if they, instead of fight each other, they collaborate. They can do many things that are useful for this earth and for themselves. The city has an identity exactly because it does not disperse itself ad infinitum like our present day modernism. The citadel of Magdeburg. Now we go to something very different, a work by an individual, an artist turned architect who never studied architecture, Hundertwasser, and you'll see what he built in Germany. We are going to see more than one work by him. So again, one individual, an artist, a painter, who turned into an architect, and he built citadel-like, buildings. It's yes, it has some idiosyncratic parts, because yes, he doesn't belong to a culture, to a tradition like the cities that I just showed in Yemen, but in his own maybe peculiar way, or in a way exotic, picturesque way, he approximates something, I think, of Italo Calvino's imaginings. I don't know if he read Italo Calvino, and it's not even important this. The important thing is that the imagination of an artist and architect somehow meets the imagination of a writer. And here in this case, I mean, it's a small citadel-like complex of buildings. Inside the courtyard, we have nature. Towards the outside, we don't see much of it, but inside we do. And now we are going to see another example from his work in Darmstadt, which is, again, we are dealing with Europe, we are dealing with Germany, and we are dealing with an individual who was not rooted in the culture of the place. He was Austrian. He was not rooted in the culture of the place, and he didn't belong to a tradition as the builders of those cities in Yemen, or what I showed before in Iran, Afghanistan, and so on, or India. Yet, I think in his own way, I mean, just let's compare this building, which is very known to us through its aesthetics, with this building. These are two, opposite ways of conceiving an urban so-called development. Here you can still see some kind of a longing for what we might call, maybe not in a very inspired way, the medieval spirit, because there are, small, how to say, there isn't a stringent geometry. It's not a rigid, rationalistic, emphatically, controlling mentality at work here. There are fluidities, there are imperfections, there are spontaneous interventions. Look at them. No architect trained in a formal way in a school of architecture would easily do something like this. No, because most schools of architecture would discourage you to have this kind of fanciful imagination and to allow yourself to display it in this way. No, but because he didn't have the formal architectural upbringing, he indulged, so to speak, in conformity with his desire, with his artistic instincts, and I'm glad he did. I'm not a great fan of Hundertwasser, but I still admire his courage and his ability to actually implement visions that are very unfashionable. So, this is a present day, so to speak, citadel. I say so to speak because it wasn't built exactly in this year, some years ago, but still in the 20th century and towards the end, actually. So we could say it's modern architecture, but it is a modern architecture which invites the use of imagination, kind of like Italo Calvino's writings. And that way of using one's imagination is totally discouraged in our rationalistic systems of education and in our rationalistic practice of the art of architecture today. I mean, look at this, you would say, what is this nonsense? Look at these windows here. Don't they remind us of the windows of those mud mini skyscrapers we saw in Yemen? Of course they do, because here it was a sensitive man who understood that, repeating ad infinitum the same rectangular window might be a little bit in opposition with his own soul and with his own dreamings and with his own imagination. And I like to think that Italo Calvino thought and felt in the same way. After all, I don't see a great opposition or difference between what we look at here and those graphic works illustrating the invisible cities of Italo Calvino. Now, a surprising discovery for me, and probably a surprising discovery for you too, a citadel in Paris. I visited Paris. I thought I know a little bit Paris, but I never imagined I would see something like this, and I didn't, in fact. So, according to Léopold Lambert, writer of the architectural narrative blog, The Funambulist, which is a very interesting blog, and I am suggesting you visit it. And these buildings, which you are going to see pictured here, were built in the second half of the 19th century under Haussmann's rebuild of the city in order to host 10,000 working class Parisians. A proletariat citadel incised by two streets and punched by a multitude of more or less narrow courtyards, writes Leopold. This impressive labyrinth of gray Paris rooftops is situated where Rue Eugène Sue meets the Rue Simard in the 18th century arrondissement. And look at this, and it is, maybe this would have made you think of Haussmann, but not what is inside. And aren't they somehow similar to an extent with what we saw in the previous citadels, that inside this grouping of buildings, there is a different spirit compared to the spirit of the elevations, of the facades. Here, just like the city walls or the walls that enclose a city or a citadel, they make concessions, so to speak, towards the street. The street is this way, clear, without deviations, without zigzagging, without disjunctions. But inside is a different story. And truly, this was a big surprise for me, because that's not what I imagined Haussmann would do. And he didn't. It's just here in this very special, and I consider it very relevant to our time, much more than this. This is, urbanism, common urbanism, in Paris or somewhere else. But here we see will. We see the will of the architect. We also see the diagonals. We see here a deviation from the Cartesian system, and even more so, this labyrinth inside the four units. And that labyrinth is very interesting. And, surprisingly, and maybe it's a revenge through fate, that in my opinion, this complex of buildings is much more innovative and, contemporary in spirit than much newer works. So again, this was built in the 19th century. But if you build something like this today, exactly as it is, you would be considered an avant-garde architect. And look at this. Surprise, surprise. You say it's chaos. All these courtyards, yes, they are a little bit dark. Yes, there are vicinities, and you can see from one apartment into another. But I imagine somehow that people enjoy themselves in this complex of buildings in the 18th century, 18th arrondissement in Paris. I like this image very much. I like it because I like the labyrinth, and I see a labyrinth here. I also see the citadel. So it's both the labyrinth and the citadel. Some images of, yes, these courtyards seem to be, problematic because there isn't much light. I would agree. But there are other virtues, I would say, in this complex of buildings. And because because what I see here, I see unity, I see multiplicity in unity. While here, I just see some kind of a multiplicity, but there is no unity. There is a level of disorder. Here, there is order and disorder. And to bring in conjunction order and disorder is not easy. Anyway, moving forward, the rooftops in the same complex of buildings built in the 19th century. Now, unfortunately, we arrive at a negative example, the so-called forgotten city of darkness in Hong Kong, where sad things happen. And in fact, it has been erased. It has been demolished. I will read. It was the most densely populated place on earth for most of the 20th century, where a room cost the equivalent of $6 per month in high-rise buildings that belonged to no country. In this urban enclave, a historical accident, as it was called, law had no place. Drug dealers, pimps, and prostitutes lived and worked alongside kindergartens, and residents walked the narrow alleys with umbrellas to shield themselves from the endless, constant dripping of makeshift water pipes above. Ungoverned and unregulated, Kowloon walled city was for so many years a stain on the urban fabric of British colonial Hong Kong. It has now been over 20 years since the city was finally demolished, and a fascinating and detailed infographic shows what life was like inside the city of darkness. I will show some images from the city of darkness. So this is a different kind of citadel, you know, it's an agglomeration, a conglomerate that arrived at becoming very unhealthy, physically speaking, and ethically or morally speaking. But we can learn a lesson from this, I think. Anyway, so this was, yes, the city of darkness in Hong Kong. The rent was indeed very low, but the living there was indeed very problematic. It was, in a way, some kind of a malevolent, well, the Tower of Babel, almost by definition, cannot stay away from a certain malevolence. But here is almost incredible what happened. You know, this vertical labyrinth. You know, I love labyrinths, but not in this way. Anyway, the City of Anarchy, it was called. The City of Anarchy. But was it an unarchitecture in the sense of Cedric Price? Probably not. And I hope unarchitecture should be referred to in a different way than what we see here. Children, they play wherever they are, but it's sad what we look at, you know, because they have no nature around themselves, and they are confined to this, yes, sad human conglomerate of buildings. Inside, life is carried on, but we don't know. We don't know if truly these people enjoy their lives in these conditions. And yes, someone is trying to catch some sun rays there, but all in all, it is very sad what we look at. And now I will end this presentation, which is just a beginning, you know, exploring what I call the citadels, old and new. With this work, I refer to sometimes. Built in Barcelona by Ricardo Bofill and Taller de Arquitectura, his architecture office, which I think is relevant to our theme. Then when, with imagination, you build something, even social housing, you can arrive at different kind of architectures than those that we are so accustomed to. we are going to see this example from their works in Barcelona before they moved to France. Unfortunately, they did so, and their architecture changed. But at that time, when they considered that Magritte was more important for them than Mies van der Rohe, they built brilliantly. So we look now at this complex of buildings which are housing. Look at it. It is a citadel. That's what it is. It is a modern citadel. It is also civilized. The labyrinth is at the very heart of the building. The building is built with knowledge. Here we are talking, as opposed to the builders in Yemen, we are talking about formally trained architects, but formally trained architects who didn't allow themselves to be dwarfed by excessive dogmas and prescriptions, and who, again, rejected rationalism and admired Magritte more than Mies van der Rohe. Although Mies van der Rohe, in my opinion, was not really a rationalist, I would consider him a mystic of the right angle and of the straight line. But his followers, and in general, the rationalism of modernity cannot be easily denied. But Thaler de Architectura found inspiration in surrealism. Their own office is actually this building, former factory that they transformed into their own office and quarters. Anyway, let's explore further this remarkable housing unit, if we are to call it so. It is a citadel. It has a courtyard. There is identity in the sense that each apartment has its own identity. It has small windows. Again, it's very different from what we saw in Yemen, and yet somehow similar. Is this density? Is the labyrinth? The narrow corridors, the narrow balconies? It's belonging to a collective, but at the same time, because of this obvious fragmentation, the building evokes that conjunction between what I call multiplicity and unity, which should be, I think, a goal for most architecture to achieve, and is not easy to achieve. One thing is for sure, this building is very different from our blocks of flats. And it is different because perhaps at that time, at least, Thaler de Architectura and Ricardo Bofill found inspiration in surrealism. And after all, the writing of Italo Calvino, what else is it? It is bringing into the city, the imagined city, the imagination, the exuberance, the dreamlike world of kind of a surrealism. If we can combine realism with surrealism, we can achieve an architecture perhaps not very different in spirit from what we look at here. Now in this picture, we see a model of the building, and here we see the actual factory where they worked, these people from Thaler de Architectura. So, a new citadel, but I would say an imaginative citadel that can be very inspiring for our days, our time as well. So, in this picture, we see this is where the offices of Ricardo Bofill and Thaler de Architectura were, and this was their creation here, the reddish citadel that I like to incorporate in this material about old and new citadels in visible cities. And the presence of the labyrinth is problematizing the excesses of a rationalism, which thinks that truth is very easy to arrive at, that beauty is very easy to arrive at, as long as you keep within the confines of its straight lines. Well, it's not so, actually. So it would be very beneficial if we receive inspirations from Italo Calvino, meaning from writers, from philosophers, from other disciplines, and get rid of the timidities and the dogmas of our sterile rationalism. They even built another unit like this, if I am to call it unit, probably not very appropriately, also near Barcelona, which is making a reference to Kafka. Yes, Kafka, literature, the labyrinth, Kafka's castle. Again, a writer influencing architecture, a painter, Magritte, influencing architecture, and we should welcome this influence. The richness of relationships, of articulations, is almost difficult to imagine with our rationalist predispositions. Look at this. You belong to the community, but you also have your own path, so to speak. And it's not a straight line. I mean, the graphic language, the geometric language is still rectangular, but because of the fragmentations of the labyrinthical disposition of spaces, you don't perceive this rectangularity in an oppressive way. Again, it is verity in unity. There is unity and obvious, but there is also verity. Bravo to them. So in the foreground, the factory, the offices of Taller de Arquitectura and Ricardo Bofill, and behind Walden 7 by them. Thank you.